May the 4th be with you all. It is Star Wars Day. If you don't know anything about me, I am a huge Star Wars fan. Towards the end of last year, for the period of around a month or so, I rewatched every single live-action Star Wars movie, so today I'm going to rank all of them. So that includes the prequel trilogy, the original trilogy, the sequel trilogy, and the 2 spin-offs. And by the way, I'm sure this video will include spoilers for every Star Wars movie, so you have been warned. I'll be ranking them from worst to best, so let's get started. Now I know straight off the bat I'm going to have some people agree with me and some people disagree with me with my number 11 spot, and that is Star Wars The Last Jedi. Now look, this film is not devoid of positives. From a cinematography standpoint, it looks beautiful, and there are moments in it that I think are entertaining, but in general, I really do not like this movie. And one of the big reasons why I don't like it is I really hate the treatment of Luke. I get the idea and principle of almost having him as a broken hero, but in execution, he does not feel like the character we know. And that culminates in one of the most unsatisfying death scenes of all time. This movie's messy as well. It is trying to do far too much. And don't even get me started on the Canto Bight stuff. While I can agree with the message within that, it is so forced and in your face. And I think this film just kind of messed up the sequel trilogy in general, because I'll talk about the other two later on down the road, but The Force Awakens set everything on a good path. But then this threw everything off, and then things had to be changed for The Rise of Skywalker that wouldn't have necessarily been done. So yes, my least favourite Star Wars movie is Star Wars The Last Jedi. So at number 10 is a movie that is better than I remembered it being, and that is Episode 2 Attack of the Clones. Now when I first saw this movie, I hated it. Like, it was instantly my least favourite Star Wars movie. On rewatch, do I think it's a good movie? No. Do I think it's an entertaining movie? Absolutely. I remember that movie being really boring. I was surprised by how much I enjoyed watching it, even though from a script standpoint, there's much left to be desired, but the action's really fun. Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan is amazing. He is so charismatic as that character, and the film's just over the top and silly, but that's what makes it fun. But again, please don't mistake that for me saying it's a good movie. It's an entertaining one. At number 9 is another one of the prequels, and that is Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. This is probably the most mixed bag of all the Star Wars movies, in my opinion. There are things in this film I will defend that others will not. The action scenes are well crafted, especially the pod race scene and the lightsaber fight towards the end. For the time this movie came out, I think the CGI is pretty good. And I don't care what anyone says, I will defend Jar Jar Binks. I wish he was in so much more of the prequels. I know most other people do not feel that way, but I unapologetically love Jar Jar Binks. You can use that quote on my gravestone. But in general, the story here is pretty dull. I think it's fair to say the prequels feel like they're a trilogy for the sake of being a trilogy. I never really felt the stakes in The Phantom Menace. At number 8 is easily one of the most divisive films in the franchise, up there with The Last Jedi, and that's Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. Now this really did split the fanbase in half after The Last Jedi. Some people thought it was an improvement, some people really hated it. I think from a script standpoint, this movie is a mess. It is trying to do way too much, the pace is all over the place, but at the end of the day, I do think this movie's good fun. The action is exciting, I think the humour lands, and there are plot points I will genuinely defend. Like, I think the Return of the Emperor's done well. I like the idea of Rey's heritage. Now look, as the final film of the Skywalker saga, should this film have been better? Yeah, probably. But I've said this since this movie came out, that J.J. Abrams had such a tough job. He had to simultaneously make the final film in a trilogy, the final film in a long-running saga, and the sequel to an incredibly divisive film, all while having rather little time to write it. So with all that in mind, I think he did a good job. At number 7 is Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. I know a lot of people have this movie higher on their list. This is a movie I like. I don't love it. I think the final 20 to 25 minutes are fantastic. Like, they feel like Star Wars, and it really puts the wars in Star Wars. The action in general in this movie is fantastic. But this movie does suffer from underdeveloped characters. There are so many characters in this movie, the film doesn't quite know what to do with all of them. So from a script standpoint, this film does feel underbaked. I know there were a lot of production issues, so that could be attributed to why the film feels like that. I love Michael Giacchino's score in this movie. I remember when this movie came out like 8 years ago, I was obsessed with listening to the score, especially that opening theme that goes alongside the title card, Rogue One. At number 6 is the movie that on rewatch, my opinion, changed most drastically, and that is Solo: A Star Wars Story. When this movie first came out, I wasn't a fan, I didn't enjoy it, but on rewatch, I had a lot of fun with this movie. There are some pacing issues here and there. I think they nailed the tone. It is perfectly fun. It does not take itself too seriously, which falls right in line with the character of Han Solo. And speaking of Han, Alden Ehrenreich is amazing, which is what I said in 2018 when I didn't even like the film. But he embodies Han Solo so well. Although, I still would have loved to have seen Lord and Miller's version. Top 5 now. At number 5 is easily the best of the prequels, and that is Revenge of the Sith. This is the movie everyone wanted from the beginning. The screenplay is so much better than the other two. There is a genuinely compelling story here, and unlike the other two, there's stakes here. It feels like something is at risk. Now, is there still some iffy dialogue delivery? Sure. And I think I would have liked more of the Obi-Wan Anakin fight towards the end, but this is by far the best of the prequels, and it's the most memeable of the Star Wars movies. Do it. Ah yes, the negotiator. Hello there. Like, for that reason alone, it's the best of the prequels. At number 4, this is an interesting one. Star Wars: The Force Awakens. Now, when this movie came out in 2015, it became my favourite Star Wars movie. And for a long time, it was genuinely in my top 20 all-time favourite movies. But ultimately, what's dampened the movie a bit is everything that came after it. Because the execution of the movies that came after it weren't particularly great, that retroactively makes this movie look not as good. And on rewatch, I definitely do think there is some pandering to fans. But I do think this movie is still good fun. Again, it's the best of the trilogy it came out in. The final 20 to 25 minutes, absolutely fantastic. Visually, it looks amazing. J.J. Abrams and Dan Mindel do an amazing job here. So you may have noticed my top 3 is just the original trilogy, but what's the order? And I'm about to be very controversial. At number 3 is The Empire Strikes Back. Now, I love this movie. I think it's great. I just think it's the least best of the original trilogy. I don't want to say the worst, because that implies this movie's bad, which it is not. I do just think this movie can suffer from middle of the trilogy syndrome. Like, there is some stuff here that just feels like it's here to fill time, but I think the mature direction they went in works so well here. It really gives Star Wars an edge, and it does do what every great sequel should do: develop the characters further from the previous movie. And of course, I Am Your Father is the greatest plot twist in cinema history. So number 2 is Return of the Jedi. In a way, this movie kind of feels like a comedy, and I mean that as a compliment. It is extremely light, but there's just such a unique charm to this movie that no other Star Wars movie has. Now, I think from a screenplay perspective, Empire Strikes Back is better, but if you put both movies in front of me, I would probably choose to rewatch Return of the Jedi. Everything with Luke, Vader and the Emperor is some of the best stuff in the whole saga, so that leaves one film, and that is the film that started it all: Star Wars. I will not be calling it A New Hope, it is Star Wars. What could I say about this movie that hasn't been said already? This movie is just perfect. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. The effects hold up marvelously. Like, this movie looks better than most movies that come out today, to be honest. I just remember rewatching this movie and kind of being astounded by it all. I felt compelled to make something. And on rewatch, this movie made it into my top 20 all-time favourite movies. In fact, on Letterboxd, it is part of my top 4. So those are my rankings for the Star Wars movies. What are your rankings? Let me know below. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. You guys are awesome. Blu-ray Billy, logging off.